안녕하세요.
The city of Seoul sparkled with its illuminated skyscrapers, reflecting the fast-paced rhythm of the corporate world. Inside the imposing KJ Group building, Kang Ji-hoon reviewed financial reports with his unwavering expression. He was feared for his cold demeanor and admired for his business genius. No detail escaped his notice, and any mistake was intolerable. The air in the meeting room was thick with tension as directors and managers avoided making eye contact with the CEO. "This is absurd," Ji-hoon said, sliding the paper across the table with a precise motion. His sharp eyes locked onto Yoon Ha-yoon, his secretary, who stood before him, gripping her tablet firmly. Her gaze, though respectful, did not waver. She knew that her position in the company was not strong enough to challenge Ji-hoon directly, but she also wouldn't allow her team to be unfairly blamed. "Mr. Kang, I take full responsibility for the mistake." "Ha," Yoon said, keeping her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "The accounting team sent me the wrong reports, and I should have reviewed them more carefully before passing them on to you." Silence filled the room, and the other directors shrank in their seats, waiting for the CEO's response. Ji-hoon was not known for his clemency. However, something about Yoon's courage made him hesitate. She could have shifted the blame to anyone else, but she didn't. Her sincerity caught him off guard, and for a brief moment, he found himself curious about this employee who, despite the pressure, refused to back down. "You're different," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Then, picking up the pen from the table, he crossed out the error and pushed the papers back. "Fix this and bring me the revised report by the end of the day." Ha-yoon gave a quick bow and left the room under the incredulous gazes of the other executives. Ji-hoon rarely let a mistake slide without consequences, and yet she had walked away unscathed. Later that evening, long after everyone had left the office, Ha-yoon was typing furiously at her computer. The floor was silent, and the glow of her screen was the only remaining light in the room. Ji-hoon walked past the administrative sector and paused when he saw the light still on. It was unusual. Employees didn't usually stay late unless they were extremely dedicated or had something to prove. "You're still here?" His voice resonated in the quiet room. Ha-yoon turned, surprised to see him standing at the doorway. He had taken off his jacket and his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing his well-defined forearms. It was an uncommon look for the CEO, who was always impeccable and formal. "I wanted to finish this before leaving," she replied, returning to her typing. Ji-hoon crossed his arms, observing her. "Do you always take responsibility for others?" She smiled slightly, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Someone has to look out for the team." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to her desk and picked up one of the coffee capsules beside her computer. "You should learn to say no once in a while." Ha-yoon let out a small laugh. "And you should learn to compliment people when they do a good job." Ji-hoon raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Few people dared to speak to him that way, yet there was no defiance or disrespect in her voice, only sincerity. He found himself smiling faintly, something rare and almost imperceptible. "Don't forget to go home. Tomorrow will be a long day," he said, walking toward the exit. Ha-yoon watched him leave, unaware that a soft smile had also formed on her lips, nor did she realize that, for the first time, Kang Ji-hoon had hesitated in front of a mere employee. The following days unfolded with the same impersonal efficiency as always within KJ Group. Ha-yoon maintained her professional demeanor, and Ji-hoon, though intrigued, showed no change in his behavior. Yet something subtle lingered in the air. Prolonged moments of silence when their eyes met, a veiled interest in each other's gestures, the growing awareness of the other's presence. That morning, the CEO had arrived earlier than usual. Walking through the empty hallways, he found Ha-yoon in the meeting room, organizing documents with admirable focus. Unaware of his presence, she let out a tired sigh and rubbed the faint dark circles beneath her eyes. "Did you sleep at the office?" Ji-hoon's deep voice broke the silence. She startled, placing a hand over her chest before composing herself. "Oh, Mr. Kang, I came in early to finalize the merger documents. I know we have an important meeting." He observed her for a moment. Working late and arriving too early is not a good habit. She offered a weary smile. "It's not permanent, just until everything is in order." Ji-hoon sighed. He admired her dedication, but a part of him couldn't ignore the unease he felt seeing her push herself so hard. Without another word, he walked over to the table, picked up one of the coffees he had brought, and placed it in front of her. "Drink this. I need you alert for the meeting." Ha! Yoon's eyes widened. No one had ever seen Ji-hoon show such a gesture of consideration. "Mr. Kang, thank you." He nodded and left the room, leaving her holding the warm cup between her hands, feeling a different kind of warmth spread through her chest. Later, during the meeting, Ji-hoon watched as Ha-yoon presented the reports with confidence and precision. It was undeniable that she had a natural talent for organization and negotiations. When one of the directors tried to challenge her, she countered with firmness and diplomacy, surprising everyone. At the end of the day, when most employees had already left, Ji-hoon passed by the administrative sector and found Ha-eun gathering some papers. "Have you always been this stubborn?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. She smiled without pausing her work. "Since I was little, my father used to say that if I wanted something, I had to fight for it." Ji-hoon nodded, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He understood that feeling well. He had always fought for his place in the Kang family empire, proving he was worthy of leading it. "Then I hope you also know when to stop and rest." He picked up the jacket draped over her chair and handed it to her. "Go home, Ha-yoon." This time, he called her by name, and for a brief second, Ha-yoon felt her heart waver. Winter was beginning to show its first signs in Seoul. The golden leaves that once adorned the streets were now carried away by the cold wind, and the gray skies signaled the imminent arrival of snow. For Ha-eun, however, the cold was not a problem. Her world still revolved around the company's commitments, and lately, around Kang Ji-hoon. Since the incident at the office, she had begun to notice small changes in the CEO. Ji-hoon was no longer as impersonal with her as before. There were moments when their gazes lingered a little longer than necessary, and his words, though always firm, carried a subtle gentleness. But nothing could have prepared her for the unexpected invitation that Friday. "Do you have plans for tonight?" Ji-hoon asked as he reviewed a contract at his desk. Ha-yoon blinked a few times, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Excuse me?" He lifted his eyes, his expression unwavering. "I need to visit a restaurant that is being considered for a new company partnership. I want a second opinion." She hesitated for a moment. Although it was an unusual task for a secretary, refusing a direct request from the CEO was not an option. "Understood. What time should I be there?" "I'll pick you up, 7 o'clock. Ha-eun felt a chill run down her spine. That meant they would be going together? Her heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'll be ready." When Ji-hoon arrived to pick her up, Ha-eun was already waiting in front of her apartment building. Unlike her formal office attire, she wore a cozy beige sweater and a dark wool coat. Ji-hoon noticed, with unexpected satisfaction, that seeing her outside the corporate environment had a different impact on him. "You look different without your uniform," he remarked, opening the car door for her. Ha-eun chuckled. "I hope that doesn't mean I look less professional." He gave a faint smile. "It means you look more human." The restaurant was sophisticated, located at the top of a luxurious building with a panoramic view of the city. The soft candlelight contrasted with the grandeur of the skyline. As soon as they sat down, Ha-eun noticed they had been placed at a more secluded table, away from the watchful eyes of other patrons. "So, what kind of partnership are we evaluating?" she asked, trying to maintain a professional tone. Ji-hoon picked up the menu, but instead of answering immediately, he studied her expression for a moment. "Actually, I wanted a second opinion on something else." She raised an eyebrow. "On what?" He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced on the table. "On you." Ha-eun felt her heart skip a beat. "What do you mean by that?" Ji-hoon averted his gaze to the illuminated city outside, as if carefully choosing his words. "You're different from any other employee I've worked with. You don't get intimidated, you don't back down easily, and yet, you're incredibly dedicated. I need to understand why." Ha-eun opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of their meals. The dinner unfolded with unexpectedly personal conversations. For the first time, Ji-hoon spoke about his childhood, about the pressure of growing up under the shadow of a business empire. In return, Ha-yoon shared about her simple life, about how she had to fight for every opportunity. As they left the restaurant, the cold wind wrapped around them. Ji-hoon looked at Ha-eun and, without thinking much, removed his scarf and draped it over her shoulders. "You don't have to do this," she said, surprised. He simply smiled. "This time, I want to." As they walked to the car, something shifted between them, something that neither the corporate world nor their social differences could prevent. In the days following the dinner, Ji-hoon and Ha-yoon began encountering each other at unexpected moments within the company. Small gestures emerged between them, a lingering glance, a subtle touch when handing over documents, the way he would stop by her desk to ask about something he could have easily delegated to someone else. Ha-yoon tried to ignore the rapid beating of her heart, convincing herself that it was all just an illusion, but fate seemed determined to draw them even closer. That Friday, Ji-hoon called for an emergency meeting. KJ Group was facing a crisis. One of its biggest investors was threatening to withdraw support due to rumors of internal instability. The problem? The investor was none other than Ji-hoon's grandfather, Kang Dae-hyun. The meeting room was thick with tension. The directors whispered among themselves while Ji-hoon maintained a stoic expression. When his grandfather entered, silence fell over the room. The older man, his hair graying and eyes sharp, analyzed Ji-hoon before taking a seat. "What is happening with your ladyship, Ji-hoon?" The patriarch's voice echoed through the room. "I've heard rumors that you've been distracted. Is that true?" Ji-hoon remained composed. "I don't believe my personal life interferes with the company's business." His grandfather let out a humorless chuckle. "You've always been a rational man, but lately, you've been making unusual decisions. Tell me, who is this employee you've been spending so much time with?" Ha-yoon froze. All eyes turned to her. Her heart pounded in her chest. Ji-hoon held his ground. "Ha-yoon is one of the most competent employees in this company." "Competent?" Dae-hyun narrowed his eyes. "Or is it something more?" Ji-hoon met his grandfather's gaze, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew exactly what this meant. This family would never accept him getting involved with an employee from a lower social class. The company's future was tied to his ability to maintain the impeccable image the Kangs expected of him. The meeting ended without a definitive verdict, but the warning was clear. When Ji-hoon left the room, he found Ha-yoon waiting in the hallway. Her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Kang, forgive me if—" she started, but he cut her off. "Don't apologize," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know this must be difficult for you." She lowered her gaze. "I don't want to be a problem for you." Ji-hoon hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. "Come with me." He led her to the rooftop of the building, where the city lights shimmered under the night sky. The cold wind wrapped around them, but Ji-hoon barely felt the temperature. He turned to Ha-yoon, his eyes intense. "I don't know how this happened, but you've become important to me," he admitted, his voice firm yet filled with emotion. "And I won't allow my family or anyone else to decide for me." Ha-yoon felt tears burn in her eyes. For a moment, all she wanted was to believe that this could work. But fate always found a way to test their feelings. That very night, she received an anonymous call. "Stay away from Kang Ji-hoon," a cold voice warned from the other end of the line, "or you will suffer the consequences." A shiver ran down Ha-yoon's spine as she heard the threatening voice on the other end of the line. Her heart pounded, and her hand trembled as she gripped her phone. Who could be trying to separate her from Ji-hoon? "Who are you?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. The response came cold and ruthless. "Someone giving you one chance to avoid the inevitable. Stay away from Ji-hoon. He belongs to a world where you will never be welcome." Before she could react, the call ended. Ha-yoon stared at her phone's darkened screen, her chest tightening with fear and doubt. There was no question this had come from Ji-hoon's family or someone influential in his life. But how far were they willing to go to drive her away? The next day, as she arrived at the office, she felt the weight of eyes on her. Whispers followed her every step, and the tension in the air hung over her like a storm cloud. When she entered her office, an envelope lay on her desk. With trembling hands, she opened it and read the contents. It was a termination letter, signed by the board of directors. Her breath caught in her throat. Her body went cold. Before she could process the shock, The door swung open and Ji-hoon stormed in, his expression filled with fury. "Ignore this," he said, snatching the letter from her hands and crumpling it. "No one is firing you." Ha-eun blinked, confused. "But it's signed by the board." Ji-hoon ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "My grandfather, he's testing your limits, but I won't let them take you away from me." Her heart ached as she saw the tension in his face. Ji-hoon, the man who was always unshaken, was now fighting his own family for her. But at what cost? "Ji-hoon, maybe they're right," she murmured, lowering her gaze. "I don't belong in your world. I will never be accepted." He took her hands in his voice filled with emotion. "You belong wherever you choose to be. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But don't let fear decide for you." A lump formed in Ha-eun's throat. There was an easy path leaving, disappearing, avoiding the chaos that was about to consume them. But there was also the hard path staying, fighting alongside him, risking everything for a love that might never be accepted. And deep in her heart, she knew her answer. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Ji-hoon let out a relieved sigh and pulled her into his arms. The moment was interrupted by the insistent ringing of his phone. Reluctantly, he answered. What he heard made his expression harden. "Understood. I'm on my way." He hung up and turned to Ha-eun, his eyes filled with worry. "My grandfather has called an urgent meeting. It looks like they've decided to take this battle to the next level." Ha-eun swallowed hard. The war was only just beginning. Ji-hoon entered the conference room with a firm and resolute gaze. Seated around the long mahogany table were the KJ Group directors, board members, and at the head of the table, his grandfather, Kang Dae-hyun. The air was thick with anticipation. "Ji-hoon, sit down," the old patriarch commanded in his deep voice. Without breaking eye contact, Ji-hoon took his seat. He knew that this meeting would determine his future. "You are making a mistake," Dae-hyun said coldly. "KJ Group needs a leader who understands his responsibilities, but you are allowing yourself to be swayed by childish emotions. A woman like Ha-eun will never belong in this world." Ji-hoon clenched his fists. What defines whether someone belongs to this world? Money? A last name? He shook his head. "If that's what KJ Group stands for, then maybe I really am not the right person to lead it." The directors murmured among themselves, surprised by Ji-hoon's boldness. His grandfather narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing him. "Are you saying you would give up everything for this woman?" Ji-hoon took a deep breath, and with a determined look declared, "I'm saying I won't give her up for anything." A heavy silence fell over the room. Dae-hyun tapped his fingers on the table, visibly displeased. Then, with a weary sigh, he finally spoke. "If that is your decision, then you will no longer have my support. I hope you can sustain your empire without my help." Ji-hoon remained composed, but inside, he knew this meant an even greater battle ahead. Outside the company, Ha-eun waited anxiously. When Ji-hoon appeared, she rushed to him. "What happened?" she asked, reading the tension on his face. He exhaled and took her hands in his. "I chose you, Ha-eun, and now I'll have to fight for it." Ha-eun's heart clenched. "I don't want you to lose everything because of me." Ji-hoon gave her a small smile. "What do I gain by keeping everything if I lose you in the process?" Tears welled in Ha-eun's eyes, and she hugged him tightly. In that moment, she knew that no matter what happened, they would face everything together. The following months were challenging. Ji-hoon had to rebuild alliances, prove his worth without his grandfather's support, while Ha-eun stood by his side, being his greatest source of strength. But with his determination, he showed that his leadership wasn't dependent on a last name, but on his own capabilities. In the end, he not only maintained the company but made it even stronger. And then, on a beautiful spring day, Ji-hoon and Ha-eun exchanged vows in a simple yet love-filled wedding. In front of friends, allies, and even some of Ji-hoon's family members who had finally accepted his decision, they promised to love each other forever. A few years later, on a sunny afternoon, Ji-hoon held his newborn daughter in his arms, while Ha-eun watched them fondly. They had overcome every hardship, proving that true love conquers all obstacles. And so, the billionaire CEO and his beloved employee built a new story, one where love would always be the greatest treasure.